I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today, I have my special guest. He is a football historian, no other than Mr. Russ Crawford.
Thank you.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Russ, and can you please introduce yourself?
Well, you told my name. I teach history at Ohio Northern University in Ada, Ohio, which has the distinction of being the location of the Wilson Football Factory, where all the NFL's footballs are made. So there's that. Um, I went to school in Nebraska at Chadron State for my undergraduate. I did my master's and Ph.D. at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I've been teaching here at Ohio Northern University for 18 years now.
At what age did you realize that you're good in writing?
Oh, probably in graduate school. And according to my advisor there, Ben Rader, who is also a famous sport historian, maybe good wasn't the name for it, but I've continued to write.
What inspired you to become an author?
Well, there's a certain pressure. I mean, Ohio Northern University is a small liberal arts college, and so we don't have as much pressure put on us to publish, but there's still an expectation that we publish scholarly work. And I just enjoyed it doing. When I wrote my dissertation, I had a good time just writing, and so I kept doing it.
Very well said, Mr. Raz. Can you tell us about your writing process?
Well, first you have to come up with an idea, and then, especially for history, you have to do fairly copious research. Sometimes you do a lot of research before you start writing. Sometimes I will start on one idea, for instance, a chapter, do the research on that and write it, and then go on to another chapter. For the women's American football, I did, oh, considerable research for about 2 or 3 years before I started writing. I interviewed something like 250 women who play tackle football from the United States and from around the world. And so I incorporated some of that into the book as well.
Interesting, Mr. Ross. How do you develop your characters and plot lines?
Well, that for me isn't a big deal. I just, if I talk about an individual that I've interviewed, I just basically put down what they told me and add some context about their historical accomplishments. So I don't really have plot lines, so to speak. Well, narratives, I suppose. It's sort of the same thing, but I have to stick to what people actually tell me or what I can find in the written record.
What challenges have you faced in your writing career?
Well, the biggest challenge is time. Um, Finding time to write. I teach 4 classes per semester, which for a college professor is a heavy load, at least for one who expects to write. So finding the time to write is a challenge. The topics I've written about, which have included not only women playing tackle football, but also American football as played by the French, uh, there aren't all that many sources that I can use. So I sometimes have to rely on interviews, and oral history is a good way of going about things anyway. But the lack of sources has been a challenge.
Definitely, indeed. How do you handle writer's block?
Well, I haven't faced that so far, which I guess is a good thing. Um,
Good for you.
yeah. Now that I've said it, I probably will. Now, generally, that's one thing that maybe history writing has an advantage in that we have research to write about, and then once we have the research done, it's all just a matter of typing.
Yes. What authors or books have influenced your writing?
Well, Ben Rader, for one, he was my advisor at the University of Nebraska. He wrote several books on sport history, which encouraged me and motivated me to do the same. Let's see. There are several. Stephen Reese gave me a chance to write chapters for one of his books. That was a very difficult process. It was a historiography, which is not easy writing. It probably as close to writer's block as I've come. Um, and those two are the main ones. Well, actually, Raider is probably the main one.
How do you approach research for your women's American football?
Well, like I said, there isn't all that much that's been written about that. So I search newspapers. Social media has been fairly useful because that's one of the few places you can find information, either on Facebook or mostly Facebook, but some on Twitter as well. They have to publish their own articles if they want them published. And let's see, there was also the women. Let's see, the Women's Football Encyclopedia, written by. I have to look at his name. Neil Rosendahl, which was already out when I started writing about this topic. And so that was very helpful. I looked at that. And then, as I said, since there wasn't much written, I started talking to people and interviewed more than 200 women who are actually playing or had played.
Can you share a memorable moment from your writing career?
Well, the most memorable moment for any author is when you get the contract to publish your book. That's always a big moment. I suppose for historians, it's not a huge thing, but the first time I got a royalty check was pretty nice. And some of the travel that I've done in writing this women's American football, I've been to France. I've been in several places in the United States, Salt Lake City, um, let's see, around Ohio, and Finland, and let's see, that's about it. So the traveling to talk to people, I went to practices at the New Orleans Saints practice facility where the women's world football games were being held. So yeah, the travel's been fun. Talking to some very interesting people, hearing their stories has been sort of the highlight of this process. And then, of course, getting the contract and the first royalty check.
How do you balance writing with the other aspects of your life?
Well, that's the challenge. Uh, Generally speaking, I say I teach a 4-4 class load, but academics still have time, but we have committees and all that sort of thing. So I do have to take time when I could be doing something else to write, and that's fortunately I have a wife who is okay with that, and she encourages me in my writing.
Hmm. Interesting, Mr. Russ. So, what advice do you have for aspiring writers out there?
Well, the advice I generally read from writers and have heard from writers is if you want to be a writer, start writing. Uh, and find a topic that interests you. If you're doing academic writing, then find a topic that hasn't been beaten to death. For instance, the Civil, excuse me, the Civil War, the American Civil War. there's tons of books on that. There is there's two now books that consider American football in France, and there's about six or seven now that consider women playing tackle football. So find an area that hasn't been uh, covered extensively and start writing about it.
Very well said, Mr. Russ. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening according to my ranking tops in the last 30 days. Because in Bhutan, I got number 6 on the Apple chart, Taiwan at 34, Jamaica 42, Cambodia 56, Cameroon at 58, Thailand at 97, South Africa at 1915, Malawi at 25, and a lot more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world like Mr. Russ Crawford. So, Mr. Russ, let's talk about your book, Women's American Football Breaking Barriers on the Off of the Gridiron. How did you craft it?
Well, I tried to do it somewhat logically. I started with, and actually I changed it around a bit. I started with girls playing American football, and then went on to started chronologically after that with the Women's Professional Football League back in the 1970s. Went on to let's see, the Women's National Football League, which had to change its name in the 2000s, and then with the Women's Football Alliance. I went chronologically after that.
Okay, Mr. Russ, why women? Is this book empowering women all over the world?
Well, it has a potential to do that. You can, if you're someone who reads about this book and you find out that women play tackle football, which is not a game that women typically play, then maybe you get the idea you can do something like that or something else that doesn't seem to be socially acceptable at the time. Certainly, the game is empowering for women. They have found a home. There's a lot of women who like knocking down their fellow women, and they've found a home in American football. So, yes, it has the potential to be that.
So, can you tell us how to empower women all over the world?
Well, I guess by hearing the stories of other women who have done things outside the norm, other women can decide, okay, I can do this. If they can do it, I can do it.
Brilliant. Yes, definitely. And well said, Mr. Ross. And how do you handle feedback or criticism of your work?
Hmm. Well, as far as positive feedback, I'm a historian, so I'm always a bit surprised that somebody read my book, and that's always gratifying. So far, I haven't received too awful reviews. And one of the difficulties of being an academic writer is getting somebody to review your work. The reviews that I've had have been fairly positive. I did receive an actual letter, which is fairly odd in this day and age, from a woman who's in a master's program somewhere in Indiana, and she mentioned that I maybe left out a couple of people, which I probably did, but I couldn't include everyone. But I don't mind that at all.
Okay, and let's talk about uh, reviews according to Mr. J.M. Bird. This book is about American football played by women all over the world. As far as I know, it's the only book that deals with this subject.
Hmm. No, it's not. There's the Rosendahl's Women's Football Encyclopedia. There's a book called Hail Mary about the Women's Professional Football League. There is one called We Are the Troopers, about the Toledo Troopers of the Women's Professional Football League. And there are a couple of memoirs. Uh, let's see, what's the name of it? Black and Blue. Uh, there's a book written by the first woman to coach in the NFL called Play Tough. And well, there was even a novel written about the legend of Jessie Smoke. It's about this woman who managed to play in the NFL. So there have been other books. At the time mine came out, it was about the third book on women's football.
So, Mr. Russ, what message or lesson, if only, would be like your book to impart to readers?
Well, I suppose that if you want to do something, even though society frowns on it, if it's a sport at least, uh, go ahead and do it. Follow your passion, I suppose.
Yes. Stop procrastinating, people. If you love football, go for it. Who knows, you will be a millionaire by playing football.
No.
Wha- no. So, is there a specific scene or chapter in women's American football that holds special meaning to you?
Well, I suppose that would be. I wrote a sort of a postscript or an afterword or something like that at the end of the book that talks about how women's football is starting to receive more recognition. For the first, let's see, 3 or 4 decades that women have been playing tackle football, they haven't received much publicity whatsoever. But in the last, maybe 5 years, that has begun to change a little bit. And so that was, I think, the most hopeful part of the book. Um, the rest of it was pretty much history, things that had happened in the past, but that was fairly contemporary. Things were starting to happen, which maybe previewed a more satisfying future, I suppose.
How do you think women's American football stands out in each genre or category?
It doesn't. That's what I was saying. It's starting to get more recognition, but very few people know that women play American football. Um, right now, there are a lot of people that are starting to sort of jump on the bandwagon for flag football, women's flag football. That's getting a lot of attention. There were commercials during the recent Super Bowl. There were commercials during the last Super Bowl. And so women's flag football is getting a great deal of attention. But still, women's tackle football sort of exists in the shadows, although it's getting better.
Better and better as we go through the next century, I think. What kind of readers do you believe will connect most of women's American football?
Well, certainly those who play football, uh, either men or women. I think some men would be interested in reading about how much women's football there has been. Academics who study women's sport or even women's history, I think, would be interested in this. Although oftentimes, maybe there's in academia, there's not a great um, positivity towards football. Um, so
Uh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
primarily the women who play football or maybe want to play football.
Yes, indeed. Are there any follow up for women's American football?
Well, to get the book published, I had about 160,000 words, and to get it published by the University of Nebraska Press, they wanted me to cut 60,000 words off. And so I primarily cut most of the international game. So women playing in Europe, in North Africa, in Asia, they're in South America, excuse me, South and Central America and Mexico, all pretty much went on the cutting room floor. So I've got 60,000 words that can be a second volume if I can get that published.
How has your perspective as an author evolved since the publication of Women's American Football?
Well, I probably learned some lessons writing that one that I won't, hopefully, some mistakes that I won't repeat. I did have a sabbatical that allowed me to do most of the writing for this, but I spent too much of that time doing research and not enough writing. So the next time I have that much free time, I will write, write, write.
Certainly. How do you see your book or Women's American Football fitting into a broader literary landscape or cultural conventions?
Well, as I said, there's a growing library of books on women's football, so it fits pretty well in there. Mine is well, the Women's Football Encyclopedia covers pretty much every women's team that's played up till 2015, from the 1970s to 2015, but it doesn't do so with much much of a narrative. It's mostly statistics and lists of teams and players and stats and that sort of thing. So mine is probably the book that examines the entire sweep of American women's American football the best, with a narrative to go along with it.
Very well said, Mr. Ross. But before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chefs in one of the five-star restaurants in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about lasagna. People, lasagna, our Food 101, Volume 12, Italian cuisine. Plus, one more. Our books are out. Not only one, but 13 volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics until 13 is the only books that you need. How to create a delicious food. Available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Ross, what are your short term and long term goals in writing?
Well, my short-term goal, I've got to write a book review uh, in the next week. That's only about 800 words, so that's not a big deal. My long-term goal, I've been talking with the Ohio University Press to write a history of the Big Ten Conference, and I hope to use this summer to get that done. And then, of course, to take the 60,000 words I had to cut from my first, uh, from my women's football project and turn that into a second volume.
Good luck for your goals, Mr. Ross, and can you please invite our listeners to support your women's American football?
I certainly can. It makes a great Christmas present, a great present for birthdays and all sorts of holidays. It's a page turner. I'm kidding there. Um, I write in a way that's accessible to the non historian, so it's not filled with jargon. It's a fairly straight ahead narrative that I think is accessible to most readers. So if you're interested in American football, American culture, uh, women playing sports, I would invite you to take a look at this. There's a lot of books in Canada at various university libraries. I have books in China, Ecuador, Germany, Hong Kong,
Yes.
Israel, Mexico, Netherlands, New Zealand, Singapore, Taiwan, Turkey, and the UK. Oh, and Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome, Mr. Ross. So, I read this book by Kara Cooney, When Women Ruled the World, Six
Hmm.
Queens of Egypt. In the Egyptian times, women reigned supreme. In the 21st century, as a part of women's American football history, how does women reign in the 21st century?
Well, there are starting to be more women coaching at the collegiate level and at the professional level in the National Football League. So women are starting to work their way up the job ladder, and maybe someday there will be a woman leading an NFL football team.
Said Mr. Russ, and thank you for your time.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for talking to me. I appreciate it. I love talking about the book.